So now that you've got Xcode installed, let's get it fired up. The way I normally load apps in OS X is to use Command and Space, which gets up Spotlight Search. You can also use the magnifying glass at the top of the screen there. And then I would just type in Xcode and you'll get a number of suggestions. Because I'm using the beta version 7, I'm going to use Xcode beta, but just make sure that you've got version 7 here and not version 6 or any other version when you load up Xcode. And then double click and that will launch the Xcode app for you. And you can see we've got Xcode now running on our system. You don't by default get a full screen ready to go, so we need to start a new project before we can really take a look around Xcode and see how it works. So let's do that first of all. We just click File and then New, and we want a new project. There we go. There's a few hoops we have to jump through to get our new project. First of all, there are a few templates that we can use, and we'll be seeing most of these later on in the course. A master detail application is like the Mail app on your iPad, if you've seen that before. So you get a list of items on the left-hand side and then a large window for the content of the email or whatever it is that your app is doing. Page-based application gives you lots of pages in your app and you can swipe from one to the other. A single view application is the simplest, just a single page of your app. That's the one we're going to be using most of the time. Then we've got a tabbed application with different icons at the bottom to switch between different tabs. And we've got a game as well, as we'll be seeing later on. You probably won't see the phone gap option unless you've worked with phone gap before, so I'll ignore that one. But make sure you're an iOS application and then click single view application. That's what we're going to be using definitely at the beginning of the course. And then click next. And then for your project name, I would go for Hello World, which is the traditional programmer's first app on any system. And then your organization name can be anything you like. I usually use Appfish, but it could be your name or any string of characters you want, really. And then the organization identifier is like a web address, but in reverse. So instead of appfish.com, you have com.appfish. So whatever your organization name is, really, I would use com. And then that without any spaces or capital letters. Make sure you've got Swift selected. And then if we're building apps for iPad, we can choose there, or iPhone, or we can build a universal app for both iPhone and iPad. But I'm going to go for just the default iPhone there. And to keep things simple for the moment, I would deselect all of these. We're not using core data until later on in the course, and we're not using any tests at the moment. So have your settings very similar to that, and then click next. And I'm just going to save mine right there on the desktop. I suggest you do something similar. Okay, and here we are. So now we have our Xcode environment up and running. Now it can look pretty intimidating to start with, but don't worry, we'll go through it nice and gradually, and you'll be pretty clear as to how it all fits together in the next few minutes. So we've got three main areas of our screen here. We've got the left pane, which by default shows all of the different files in our app. So the files that make up our app. We'll look at some of those in particular in a minute, but that's generally what this left pane is used for. You can click on the icons here to see a few more options. So you've got a search, you can look for errors in your app and various other bits and bobs, but the vast majority of the time we'll have the file structure listed here. And this main window in the middle is where we spend most of our time working. So usually we're going to be coding in here, but this by default is the information about our app. So you can see we're on general information here. So we've got something called the bundle identifier, which is a unique identifier for our app. So it starts with com.appfish, as we saw a minute ago, and then it has the name of our app. And then we can change things like version number, build number, or the team that's working on, deployment target. So this is 9 because we're targeting iOS 9. We can change from iPhone to iPad and to a universal app. We can choose the device orientation that's supported and work with app icons and a load of other stuff as well. So we'll be coming back to this as we want to do more advanced things later on in the course, and we'll look at these other options as well along the top there, but we won't be spending a lot of time at the beginning of the course in this area here. And then on the right, we've got our right menu, which is a context menu. So depending on what you've got selected in the main area, this is going to be different. So at the moment, it's showing us general information about our app. So the app name and various settings down here, which we're not particularly worried about. But we will be using this a lot, particularly to drag things like labels, text boxes, tables, and other things into our app. So those are the three main windows. Up at the top, you can see we've got the play button there, which is nice, which allows us to run the app. And in fact, we can run the app right now. So before we've even changed it at all, we can click play, and that will then build the app. So you can see the message up here telling you that the app is being compiled. And then you can see we've got a number of different simulators that we can select from. I would recommend sticking with iPhone 6 for now because it's quite a nice size. And then up pops our simulator. So this is our iPhone running on the Mac. And if we give that a few moments, it will actually create our app and run it on the phone. Because we haven't done any coding or anything for our app's not actually going to do anything, but it will launch and it will give us just a plain blank screen. While that's loading, I can just show you we can actually use the iPhone completely. We can look at photos. So we've got a few default photos on there and you can scroll up and down. This is the iPhone simulator running on the Mac. So I can actually click hardware and then I can rotate the device. So I can make it landscape, rotate it back again, and I can click the home button and even play with the settings and do pretty much everything that you would do on a normal phone. So that's quite fun to start off with. Feel free to pause the video and have a little play, see how far you can get with your simulator. Here we go, the app has now loaded. So that was the launch screen just saying hello world, and here is our very first app. So it does absolutely nothing because we've made no changes whatsoever, but that is our app running on the iPhone. So that's pretty exciting in itself. You can of course stop the app using the stop button there and choose your device, as I mentioned a moment ago. Up here, we've got some handy options. So if we want to have two windows open at once in the middle, we can bring up the assistant editor as it's known, and we'll definitely be doing that later on when we're working with a graphical view of our app combined with some code at the same time. So that's a really useful feature. And the two arrows there are about source control, which we're not using at the moment, so you can ignore those. And here we've got the option to hide the left and right bars. There we go. So depending on whether or not we're actually using them, we can get rid of them. And there's also a hidden bar at the bottom. There it is, which comes in when you run your apps, and sometimes that will appear when you get errors. And you can also give yourself messages as the app is running, which we'll do in the next couple of videos. So that's a very useful area to have when you're running and testing your apps. And that's pretty much all there is to it. We've obviously got lots of options up here that we'll see as and when we need them, but that's generally how the Xcode interface works. Before we actually start dragging things into our apps and creating apps that do things, I'm just going to show you the two main files down here that we're going to be working with. So we have, first of all, the main storyboard. This is the graphical interface for our app. And you can see it there. I've just zoomed out. Hopefully you can see that. So our main screen is known as a view controller. And everything in iOS development that we're going to drag onto the screen is called a view. So we would drag a view onto the screen, and it might be a text view, it might be a label view, it might be an image view, but they're all views, and this is the view controller because it controls the views. So this is our main screen that we're working with. And you can see we've got quite a wide screen by default. As we've got this view controller up, the context menu on the right you can see has changed. And what's quite useful, particularly in the early days when you're developing your app, is that you actually select the size of the phone that you'll want to be working with. So if we're working with the iPhone 6, then that's 4.7 inch. So then you can get a view controller which is the right size. You might not want to do that if you're developing for lots of different phone sizes, but for now, that will be fine. And we can obviously choose the orientation and a few other options there as well. We'll come and look at those as we need them later on in the course. So this is where we can graphically design our app and decide what it's going to look like. The other file that we're going to be spending a lot of time on is the viewcontroller.swift file, and that's the major file that contains all our code to control that view controller. So this is really important, and this is where we're going to start actually writing code to control our apps. So we'll be writing code in a couple of videos time, but in the next video we'll see how to drag objects onto our apps and actually run our app and view the objects that we've dragged in the simulator. See you there.